You think you know someone, but the depths of their deceit can drown a family. Those ominous words kept echoing in my mind as I stared at the bank statements laid out before me. Page after page documented a steady stream of withdrawals from our family's savings account. Thousands upon thousands of dollars vanished into thin air. My heart pounded as I scoured the records, frantically searching for an explanation. At first, I feared the worst, that my husband of 30 years, Richard, had been unfaithful not just emotionally but financially as well. We'd weathered our share of storms but always emerged united on the other side. This, however, felt like a tidal wave crashing against the foundation of everything we'd built. I confronted him that evening, printouts in hand, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Richard, we need to talk. What's going on with the money?" He furrowed his brow in confusion, taking the statements from my trembling hands. "What are you talking about? What money?" As his eyes rapidly scanned the documents, I could see the truth dawn on his face. A sickening realization that this deceit ran deeper than either of us could have imagined. We were the victims of an inside job. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "That lying little weasel! It was Brant, I'm sure of it." Brant, my own son, the one I'd nurtured from a helpless infant to a grown man of 28. It couldn't be. Could it? He wouldn't. I started, but the words caught in my throat. Of course he would. He'd been blindly devoted to his wife Cora ever since they'd met 3 years ago. If anyone could manipulate him into betraying his own family, it was that conniving viper. Richard's jaw clenched. "I'm calling him, right now." "No, wait." I grabbed his arm, my mind racing. If we confront him directly, he'll just deny everything. We need proof first. As painful as it was to admit, my own flesh and blood had potentially been turned against me. But I refused to let this devastate our family without a fight. Over the next few days, I meticulously combed through every statement, receipt, and online record. The evidence was damning. Money siphoned into accounts linked to shell companies and real estate purchases under assumed names. But for what purpose? Then it hit me. The old saying about lies building upon lies rang true. Brant had told us Cora's startup needed another round of investment. I'd had my doubts about the viability of her business, but I trusted my son's judgment. How could I have been so blind? With a few keystrokes, I uncovered a horrifying truth. Luxury clothing, high-end vacations, a brand new Mercedes. Cora's startup was funding her wildly extravagant lifestyle, and she'd ensnared Brant in a web of deception to drain us dry. Hot tears stung my eyes as I pieced together the sordid puzzle. My own daughter-in-law had betrayed our family's trust in the cruelest way imaginable, robbing us financially to bankroll her greed. But she was sadly mistaken if she thought I would let her get away with it. This was war, and I would fight to protect what mattered most, my family. No more Mrs. Nice Mom. The velvet gloves were coming off. It was time to stop playing defensive and go on the attack. I picked up the phone and dialed the only person I could trust, my younger daughter, Jules. "Jules, honey? We need to talk." I could hear the shock in Jules's voice through the phone. "Mom, what's going on? You sound upset." "It's your brother," I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "He's been stealing from us. Thousands of dollars siphoned out of our savings account." There was a pause as Jules processed this. "Brant? But why would he do that?" "It's that lying snake, Cora. She's been manipulating him, making him believe her made-up startup needs more investments. But it's all a sham. She's using our money to fund her lavish lifestyle." "That bitch!" Jules' anger was palpable. I never trusted her snake eyes from the moment Brant brought her home. I filled her in on the evidence I'd uncovered, the bank records, the shell companies, the luxury purchases, all linked back to Cora's scheme. By the time I finished, Jules was seething. "We need to confront them. Put an end to this once and for all." "I already tried talking to Brant," I admitted reluctantly. "He's completely under Cora's spell. She has him wrapped around her little finger." "Then we go over his head," Jules stated firmly. "Call a family meeting. You, me, Dad, and that conniving little gold digger. Force them to face the truth head on." I took a deep breath, considering my options. As much as I hated to admit it, Jules was right. We had to take the fight directly to Cora. "All right, I'll set it up for this weekend. Just prepare yourself, sweetheart. It's going to get ugly." 2 days later, we were all seated in the living room. a tension-filled tableau of shattered trust. Brant and Cora looked almost comically out of place amidst the frayed upholstery and well-worn furnishings, with Cora absurdly decked out in designer labels. "What's this all about?" Brant asked, shifting nervously as his gaze bounced between me and his father's stony expressions. I wasted no time with preambles, letting the evidence speak for itself, as I laid out the bank statements and incriminating receipts on the coffee table. "Care to explain this, Brant?" His eyes went wide as he scanned the documents. I don't understand. Where did you get these?" "From your bank statements, the ones you've been so desperately trying to hide," Richard growled. "Stealing from your own family to bankroll this Jezebel's spending habits," Cora gasped in mock offense. "How dare you? Brant has been investing in my company, that's all." "Save it, you lying grifter." Jules jumped in, her voice dripping with disdain. "We know all about your little Ponzi scheme and your company that doesn't actually exist." Brant's head whipped towards Cora, his expression a maelstrom of hurt and anger. "Cora, please tell me it's not true. What have you done?" For a moment, I actually felt a pang of sympathy for the woman as the mask slipped, revealing her true ugly nature. A cruel, calculating smirk twisted her lips. "Of course it's true, you naive fool," she hissed at my son. "Did you really think a man with such modest means could satisfy me? This was the only way to maintain the lifestyle I deserve." My heart broke for Brant as the crushing realization hit him. The woman he loved was nothing more than a remorseless con artist. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a choked sound of anguish. "Get out." The words burst from me like venom. "Get out of my house and stay away from my family. You're a despicable, selfish monster, Cora, and you're never going to leech off us again." If looks could kill, her venomous glare would have struck me dead on the spot. But I didn't flinch, locking eyes with the vile creature who had shattered my son's heart and betrayed our family's trust. "This isn't over," she spat, snatching up her designer purse. "You'll regret crossing me." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. An uneasy silence hung over the room in the aftermath of her explosive exit. Brant buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I longed to comfort my son, but he needed to navigate this anguish on his own. Sometimes the harsh truths in life are the only wake-up calls that can set you back on the right path. This was just the opening salvo in what was sure to be an ugly war. But I took solace in one certainty. Cora's reign of deception over my family had finally been broken. Now it was time to make her pay. In the days following Cora's explosive exit, an uneasy calm settled over the house. Brant had locked himself away, emerging only for brief meals before retreating to his bedroom sanctuary of solitude and shame. I ached to comfort him, but my husband warned me to give him space. "He needs to work through this himself," Richard said gruffly. "Coddling him will only enable his weakness." As much as it pained me, I knew Richard was right. Tough love was the only antidote to Cora's poisonous manipulation. So I focused my energies elsewhere, gathering ammunition for the inevitable war that Viper had promised. I spent hours hunched over the computer, stitching together the insidious trail of Cora's tangled web. Fake business plans, forged investment prospectuses, backdated contracts, all designed to dupe my poor son into draining our assets to fund her rapacious greed. My fingers trembled with rage as I compiled the evidence, but I refused to let anger cloud my judgment. This had to be an airtight case. Jules proved to be an invaluable ally, using her social media skills to plumb the depths of Cora's sullied past. It turned out my son's wife had a well-traveled trail of ruined lives scattered across multiple states and ex-husbands. "This one's a real piece of work," Jules reported grimly, forwarding me a fresh dossier on Cora's sordid history, from fraud convictions to whispers of corporate espionage. "She's not just a gold digger, Mom. She's a full-on professional con artist." The more I uncovered about this vile succubus, the more my protective fury burned like an inferno. How dare this hecatomb of human debris inflict such devastation on my family? On my son? There would be a reckoning, make no mistake. One afternoon, lost in my efforts to trace a series of shell company transactions, the doorbell rang. I frowned, not expecting anyone, and peered through the viewfinder to see a stunning brunette standing on the porch. I opened the door a crack. "Yes, can I help you? Mrs. Harmon?" The woman smiled, her teeth dazzling. "I'm Trina, Cora's younger sister. I was hoping we could talk. I stared at her blankly for a moment, then scoffed. I want nothing to do with anyone from that family of vipers. Trina held up her hands pleadingly. Please, just give me a minute. I had no idea what Cora was up to, but I want to make things right. Something in her eyes suggested sincerity, so against my better judgment, I stepped back and let her enter. As I led her to the living room, she was already talking a mile a minute. I always knew Cora was troubled, but I never imagined she could stoop this low. When she told me what happened, I was horrified. Betraying her own husband's family like that? It's unforgivable. Trina whirled on me, her features contorted with remorse. Mrs. Harmon, you have to believe me. If I'd known about her scheme, I would have stopped her myself. Cora and we didn't exactly have the most stable upbringing, but that's no excuse for her behavior. I regarded her warily. Then why are you here? It's a little late for apologies, don't you think? Trina took a deep breath. Because I want to help make this right. Cora has burned me too many times with her lies and manipulations. It's time she finally faced real consequences for her actions. She reached into her purse and withdrew a slim manila folder, handing it to me. In here are copies of records from her last 3 marriages, proof of the financial deception, documents she tried to have sealed as part of those divorce settlements. I'm hoping it can help your case against her. I opened the folder, scanning the pages with a mixture of disgust and grim satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of damning evidence I needed. Why give this to me? I asked, eyeing her suspiciously. What's in it for you? Trina shrugged. Let's just say Cora took enough from me growing up. I want to make sure she can't do that to anyone else ever again. I considered her offer carefully. While I was loath to trust anyone from Cora's poisonous extended family, I couldn't deny that these were the cold, hard facts we needed to bury that vile charlatan for good. And if this Trina was willing to betray her own flesh and blood in the name of justice, well, perhaps we had an unlikely ally in our battle. All right, I said at last, holding her gaze. I'll take whatever you've got on that monster. It's time we put an end to Cora's reign of terror once and for all. The die was cast. The war had begun in earnest. With Trina's damning evidence providing new ammunition, I felt a steadier sense of resolve. For too long, Cora had held all the cards through her web of lies and deception. But now, finally, the veil was lifting to reveal her true monstrosity. Of course, I had no illusions that this battle would be easily won. That conniving viper had already made it abundantly clear she wouldn't go down without an ugly fight. I braced myself for further retaliation as I waited for the next explosive grenade to be lobbed into our lives. It came sooner than expected in the form of my daughter Jules, who burst through the front door looking equal parts distraught and furious. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," she said through gritted teeth, thrusting her phone into my hands. There on the screen was unmistakable evidence of Cora in a very compromising situation, draped across some faceless man's lap in a shadowy bar, their bodies intertwined in a way that left no doubt as to their intimacy. My stomach turned as I studied the incriminating photos. So this was how the treacherous snake chose to sink her fangs into my family once more, by attacking us from the inside. Did she truly have no limit to her depravity? "Where did you get these?" I asked quietly, already suspecting the answer. "From that worm Brant," Jules spat, her voice crackling with fury. "He sent them to Aiden first, blubbering about Cora being unfaithful and wanting to take her to court, like he's the injured party here." I sighed heavily. Of course. My poor blinded son still couldn't see the bigger picture through the haze of his ruined dreams. "He has no idea, does he?" I murmured. "That she's just twisting the knife yet again by trying to make him feel like the victim." Jules scoffed bitterly. "You mean like she's been doing this whole time, stringing him along as her pathetic puppet while she bleeds us dry to fuel her selfish desires?" "I should have seen this coming," I admitted, shaking my head slowly. "Cora is far too much of a narcissist to simply slink away after being exposed. She has to maintain control of the story at any cost." "Well, it's not going to work this time." Jules's eyes burned with determination. "We have all the evidence we need to bury that toxic leech once and for all, and we have an inside man working on our side now." I raised an eyebrow at that. "You've spoken to Aiden?" A small smile played across my daughter's lips, the first I'd seen in weeks. He's already pulling some legal favors, gathering ammunition for when we finally take that witch to court. Her twisted little scheme doesn't have a prayer once he's through. My heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. Thank heavens Jules had chosen a good, ethical man like Aiden to share her life with. His integrity and legal contacts would prove to be indispensable weapons. Good. We're going to need all the help we can get, sweetheart, because this war is about to escalate in ways we can't even imagine. Those words proved prophetic just days later when a certified letter arrived, a bombshell summons from Cora's attorneys. She was petitioning for divorce from Brant on the grounds of emotional anguish and infidelity. Her legal team was already painting her as the victim to disguise her own despicable transgressions. I could only imagine the fictitious horrors that vile succubus had concocted to vilify my son in the court's eyes. I burned with outrage at the injustice of it all. But that paled in comparison to the fury that consumed me when I read the final lines, a bald-faced demand that the matrimonial assets be split 60-40 in Cora's favor as compensation. Over my dead body, I seethed, crumpling the damning document in my fist. That grasping serpent has finally overplayed her hand. If she thinks we're going to simply hand over our life's earnings as a reward for her depraved treachery, she's utterly deluded. The gauntlet had been thrown down in the most disrespectful manner imaginable. So be it. I would match Cora's venom with a fury of my own, stopping at nothing to decimate her vile ambitions and restore dignity to my family. Steeling my nerves, I reached for my phone and dialed the one number that could help turn this situation to our advantage. Aiden? It's Delia. We need to have a serious discussion about Cora's twisted divorce filing. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as we assembled in Aiden's cramped office downtown. My son Brant looked utterly bewildered at finding himself on the opposite side of the legal firing line from his own family. I don't understand why we're doing this, he mumbled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Cora's the one who conned and deceived you into draining our family's life savings to fund her greed, I interjected sharply. Yes, we're all quite aware of that by now, Brant. The hurt look on his face twisted like a knife in my heart, but I refused to show any outward signs of weakness. Not when we were finally taking the battle directly to that vile succubus. Jules squeezed his arm consolingly. We're doing this for your own good, little brother, to protect you from being taken advantage of any further. Brant opened his mouth to protest, but Aiden cleared his throat commandingly. All eyes turned to my future son-in-law as he straightened the crisp collar of his shirt, every inch the image of a formidable legal professional ready for battle. All right, let's get started. I've gone through Cora's divorce petition with a fine-toothed comb, and as expected, it's a novel's worth of utter fiction designed to paint her as the victim. He rifled through a thick manila folder. Emotional anguish, spousal abandonment, criminal allegations against Brant, you name it, she's thrown it in as a salacious accusation. My jaw clenched as Aiden listed off the ruthless character assassinations Cora had leveled at my son. As if her serial betrayals and systematic looting of our accounts weren't injurious enough. That's a bold strategy, given the evidence stacked against her, Jules remarked darkly. Aiden nodded grimly. She's going for a shock and awe campaign, burying us in so many wild fabrications that she's betting we'll get overwhelmed trying to counter them all. But, he lifted his chin defiantly, I've got a few moves of my own to counter. With a series of deft keystrokes, he pulled up a multimedia presentation that quickly had me squirming in discomfort. There, broadcast in vivid high definition, were the incriminating photographs of Cora's indiscretions, leaving no doubt as to her chronic infidelity throughout her marriage to Brant. We hit her with a ruthless blitz of our own evidence right out of the gate, Aiden declared. Have the Jezebel explain away these images while we follow up with documentation of her embezzlement, financial fraud, even criminal charges from her shady past. I could feel the palpable tension radiating off Brant as he absorbed the full extent of Cora's duplicity, immortalized in those damning photos. His fists clenched, and for a moment I feared he might become physically ill. You knew about this? His voice cracked with a ruined mixture of accusation and betrayal. You all knew she was cheating on me this whole time? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as Jules, Aiden, and I exchanged weighted looks. I was the one who finally found the words to respond. We knew that she was willing to go to monstrous lengths to control you through deceit and manipulation, I said carefully. We were waiting for the most strategic opportunity to counter her. The disappointment etched across Brant's features cut me to the core. As a mother, I had failed in so many ways to protect him from this devastation, but there would be time later to rebuild our fractured family. First, we had to slay the demon responsible for this misery. I'm so sorry, son, I murmured, placing a hand on his arm. But I promise you, Cora's reign of terror over this family ends today. We're going to make her pay for every last crooked scheme and underhanded betrayal. Brant regarded me hollowly for a long moment before giving a small, resolute nod. The fight had finally burned away his naive illusions. Now he was ready to embrace the harsh reality of the battle that loomed before us. All right, he said, his voice regaining its steely edge. Let's take down the bitch, once and for all. Emboldened by my son's words, I turned to Aiden with a feral smile. You heard him. It's time to unleash the Kraken. The courthouse was pandemonium the day our opening legal salvo against Cora detonated. Aiden had strategically timed the release of our incriminating evidence to catch the opposition completely flat-footed. I'll never forget the look of shock and panic that contorted Cora's features as high-definition video clips aired of her in flagrante delicto with multiple male companions. Aiden's team had spared no detail in capturing the extent of her wanton infidelities. You lying, cheating whore! Brant erupted from our side of the gallery, his face twisted with anguish and rage. Is this why you've been bleeding me dry all these years? To support your stable of boy toys? I winced at my son's uncharacteristic outburst, but couldn't fault his fury. Cora had single-handedly shattered his trusting, loving heart into pieces. She deserved every venom-laced barb that Brant could muster. But predictably, the serpent had her own counterstrike primed, rising to her feet with a look of perfectly cultivated umbrage. How dare you subject me to such humiliating and falsified accusations? She swept a theatrical hand towards the incriminating videos, now frozen on images of her in extremis. These distasteful smear tactics might make for good courtroom theatrics, but they simply underscore the depravity and abuse I've been forced to endure throughout our sham of a marriage. A gasp rippled through the spectator gallery as Cora pulled off her next move. Makeup experts strategically disguising her flawless features under a mask of brutal injuries. With a few deft touches branding around one eye and garish scars on her cheeks, the venomous viper had reinvented herself as the innocent victim of spousal abuse. I felt a surge of nausea at the sheer, malicious audacity of her ploy. Brant Harmon is a dangerous, unstable man, a monster who carries the familial stamp of unrepressed violence. She jabbed an accusing finger towards our side of the court. Judge, you see before you today the tragic effect his sadistic tantrums have inflicted upon me, leaving me broken, destitute, and in constant fear for my very life. As her honeyed lies flowed like poisonous nectar, I could see a palpable shift among some of the jurors. A few looked taken aback, possibly even swayed by the dramatized atrocities she presented. I gritted my teeth in outrage, my fury compounded at seeing my sweet-natured Brant portrayed as some kind of brutish monster. These were exactly the sort of underhanded tactics we had warned him to expect from Cora's devious legal team. But Aiden had assured us he was prepared with a decisive counterstrike, and true to his word, he smoothly called up images of Cora's financial transactions over the past 3 years. In meticulous detail, line after line of frivolous expenditures were laid bare. Designer clothing splurges, lavish international vacations, even the purchase of a top-of-the-line luxury sedan. If Miss Cora Reynolds was truly the tragic, impoverished victim of spousal abuse she so dramatically portrays, where precisely did the funds for these excessive indulgences derive? Aiden's voice carried a razor edge as he paced before the jurors. No, I'd posit the resources fueling such a rapaciously indulgent lifestyle originated from a far more nefarious source. His finger stabbed accusingly at the opposing counsel's table. Namely, the systematic looting of her husband Brant Harmon's family assets under the guise of funding a fictional startup company to the ruinous tune of nearly $500,000. The shouting and acrimony that erupted was nothing short of biblical, as the dueling legal teams resorted out-and-out bedlam in the court. Vicious accusations were hurled back and forth as Cora predictably played her final card, crocodile tears of feigned distress, collapsing into wailing hysterics over the injustice of Aiden's allegations against her character. As the judge finally restored order by calling a recess, I caught Aiden's eye across the gallery. He offered a grim nod. The first salvo had hit its mark. Now the real battle would begin in earnest. I steeled myself, drawing Jules and Brant close as I prepared for the inevitable backlash heading our way. Because there was no way that vile succubus would go down without unsheathing every last weapon in her diabolical arsenal. "Stay strong, you two," I murmured as the towering oak doors boomed shut behind us. "The war has only just begun." The ensuing weeks were some of the most grueling of my life as the legal war raged on. True to form, Cora unleashed the full force of her depraved powers, filing motion after motion in an attempt to bury us under an avalanche of paperwork. Aiden assured us this was merely standard legal gamesmanship to buy time, but I could see the strain it placed on our entire family. Brant grew increasingly haggard, his usual youthful glow sapped by the stress of confronting his wife's betrayal on such a public stage. More than once, I found him holed up in his old childhood bedroom, knuckles bloodied from pounding the walls in anguished frustration. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Mom," he confided in me during one particularly dark moment. "Having every secret, every private failing dissected and crucified before the world, it's torture." I pulled him into a fierce embrace, blinking back my own tears. "I know, my sweet boy. Believe me, if there was any other way, I would have taken it. But that woman left us no other choice." His shoulders shook with silent sobs against me. "Why, Mom? Why did she have to be so evil and cruel? I loved her with everything I had." My heart broke anew for all his stolen hopes and innocence, so ruthlessly crushed by that vile serpent's avarice. What sort of waking nightmare had she subjected my caring, sensitive son to in the name of fueling her own selfish desires? Thankfully, the relentless Sturm und Drang of Cora's legal blitzkrieg was nearing its inevitable crescendo. Her myriad motions for dismissals and mistrials were rapidly getting batted down by the no-nonsense judge. With options dwindling, she and her unscrupulous legal team were forced back on the defensive. It was during this window of respite that Aiden and his investigators finally managed to meticulously reassemble every damning thread of Cora's intricate con. What they uncovered was a masterclass study in sociopathic deception, a decade's worth of falsified documents, fake business identities, even forged educational transcripts forming the bedrock of her sham life story. "She's a prodigy," Aiden grimly relayed over glasses of scotch one night, "an honest-to-God pathological savant when it comes to interweaving lies and writes them into credible realities." He shoved a thick dossier across the table, his mouth twisted into a scowl of disgust. Multiple false identities, a complete trail of invented lives dating back to her late teens. It's as if her very existence has been a carefully constructed script designed to facilitate her cons and swindles. I flipped through the damning contents with rising revulsion. Here was a complete psychological profile of the monster who had torn my family asunder. A narcissistic, Machiavellian parasite capable of calculations depravity, all in pursuit of self-gratification. No guilt, no remorse, no core of human decency to be found. "My God," I whispered, closing the file as if it burned me. "She really is nothing more than a vile sociopath." In the end, it was the sheer, incontrovertible weight of the evidence that proved to be Cora's undoing. Her house of lies, so meticulously constructed over decades of malicious cunning, came crashing down in spectacular fashion over the span of just a few short days. I'll never forget the triumphant night the jury's verdict was read. Guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, criminal conspiracy. The litany of felonies washed over me in a tidal wave of vindication. Brant watched in stupefied silence as his wife was led away in shackles, still protesting her innocence with that same mask of deluded self-entitlement. Jules and I locked eyes over the celebratory chaos, exchanging looks of grim satisfaction. At long last, justice had been served, both for our family's financial devastation and the emotional turmoil inflicted by that vicious, soulless succubus. In the coming days, the restitution orders began raining down like a final penance for Cora's depravities. In addition to multi-year prison sentences for her litany of crimes, she was compelled to forfeit every last ill-gotten asset to the plaintiffs she had so ruthlessly victimized. Properties, bank accounts, that ostentatious Mercedes she so loved to flaunt. All of it clawed back from the talons of her greed to be redistributed among the families she had bled dry over her decades of con artistry. For our family, it was a potentially transformative reversal from the financial devastation Cora had wrought, though the emotional wounds would take far longer to heal. As I watched the federal marshals hauling off truckload after truckload of Cora's seized belongings, I felt an uncharacteristic pang of pity for the sociopathic scourge. Because in that moment, it struck me that everything she had devoted her miserable existence to attaining, the wealth, the status, the delusions of finer belongings, was all little more than a gilded cage trapping her soulless being. And I realized that in the end, there was ultimately no greater punishment than leaving a malignant narcissist like Cora Jean Reynolds alone to wither within the squalid, hollow confines of her own wretched psyche. In the aftermath of Cora's well-deserved downfall, an uneasy sense of calm gradually settled over our family. It was almost disorientating at first, having grown so accustomed to the relentless churn of battles, hearings, and legal machinations infiltrating every waking moment. Now, silence. Of course, one could hardly call the haunted emptiness reflected in Brant's eyes as peaceful. My poor son had been so utterly shattered by the monstrosity of Cora's deceptions that some days he could barely summon the energy to get out of bed. I knew the road to recovery would be long and arduous for him. Having the unconditional loving trust in another human being so brutally eviscerated leaves psychic scars that fester for a lifetime. Brant was likely carrying trauma that would take years of counseling to fully unpack and process, but I also knew that with time and the support of his family, he would eventually find his way back from the nightmare that vile succubus had dragged him through. My son's kind, gentle spirit may have been battered, but it could never be extinguished permanently. Not while I still drew breath to nurture its renewal. The first real glimmer of light came a few months after the final restitution orders were handed down against Cora. Jules and Aiden had finally set a wedding date, and the impending celebration of new beginnings seemed to rekindle a tiny spark of life behind Brant's deadened eyes. "You'll stand up there with me that day, right, little brother?" Jules had asked him over Sunday breakfast one morning, squeezing his hand affectionately. "Be one of Aiden's groomsmen?" For a long, horrible moment, I didn't think Brant had even registered her words. Then finally, he looked up and managed the faintest of smiles, a barely perceptible nod. Yeah, of course, I'd be honored." In that simple exchange, a major turning point had been reached. New horizons of healing lay ahead. As the months marched on towards Jules and Aiden's big day, other signs of renewal sprouted among the wreckage Cora had left behind. Legal disbursements finally began granting our family access to the seized assets, liquidating properties, investments, and recouping that $500,000 she had so insidiously pilfered from our accounts. The restitution wouldn't make us wealthy by any means, but it did provide a solid bedrock of financial security upon which we could start building anew. Ever pragmatic, I opted to take a portion of the recouped funds to pay off the mortgage on our family home. This little sanctuary that Cora had so ruthlessly sought to strip away would now be ours free and clear in perpetuity. I wanted to ensure my children and any grandchildren to come would always have a solid foundation and sense of belonging in this world. The real revelation, and the first genuine smile I'd seen from my son in ages, came when Aiden presented him with the marshal's final disposition manifest on Cora's seized assets. "I figure this last remaining property title is rightfully yours, man," he said, sliding the document towards Brant. "Fair compensation for the psychological torture she put you through." I watched in surprise as Brant's eyes lit up, his fingers trembling slightly as they traced over the title. "You're giving me her Mercedes?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Seriously?" Aiden clapped him on the shoulder with a conspiratorial wink. "Let's just consider it the first step towards you leaving that poison behind and reclaiming your future, buddy. After so many months of darkness, The sight of my son's face radiating with that unbridled spark of youthful enthusiasm was enough to finally crumble the walls around my own heart. I excused myself from the room to weep tears of catharsis, muttering silent praises of gratitude that we had survived Cora's malice intact. The biggest healing milestone was yet to come on Jules and Aiden's wedding day. A beautiful late summer affair under a canopy of old-growth trees, the whole family gathered to rejoice in new bonds of love being forged. I beamed with pride watching my son walk the aisle as a member of the bridal party, his jaw set with determination, his eyes clear and focused on the future. As the newly wedded couple shared their first dance amidst a shower of rose petals, I slipped an arm around Brant's shoulders. He startled at first, then relaxed into my embrace with a contented sigh. "I'm so proud of you for making it through the darkness, my sweet boy," I murmured. "Our family is whole again, and nothing will ever tear us asunder like that again." Brant was silent for a long moment, his gaze transfixed on the radiant young couple before us. Finally, he found the words, simple, but filled with newfound conviction. "I know, Mom, and I swear on my life, I'll never let us be destroyed by evil and lies again either." As the opening notes of the couple's first dance struck up, I smiled and gave my son's hand a reassuring squeeze. After so many storms had threatened to break us, the rainbow of redemption shone brilliantly on our path ahead, a trails paved with forgiveness, newfound strength, and the eternal, unbreakable bonds of family.